Hello and welcome to part 4 of the Chris Watts prison interview analysis. We left off at a bit of a cliffhanger in part 3 because we were just getting into Chris talking about his mistress and the affair, and we had left off with that great line of "you lost so much weight that your finger lost weight," because that was Chris's excuse for taking off the wedding ring. And we went into 3 significant reasons why that's completely unbelievable. And where I didn't get to go into next was who with a brain could possibly believe this, because Graham and Tammy kind of, they don't give him as hard of a time as they could have with that, because of how little sense it makes that his ring would come off while he's shoveling, even if that is it's physically impossible, and it's real easy to make up as a lie. So who in the world would possibly believe that? Well, in one of the mistress's interviews, she was asked a very simple question: did you know he was married? Now that's a yes or no answer. Only 2 choices, yes or no. Did you know he was married? Either yes you did or no you didn't. So out of these 2 choices, which of those 2 answers did the mistress pick? She said he wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Well, you could know that he was married and still see that he's not wearing a wedding ring. So what that says, it kind of reminds me of the first troll comment I ever got, where someone said, "I love watching nobodies talk about old news. What are your thoughts on the Titanic?" Now we can just bypass the idiocy of ignoring history and what we can learn from it, and focus in on what my thoughts of the Titanic really are, because they relate to this now. It wasn't the tip of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. It was the 90% of mass hidden under the water that tore the hole in the hull of the ship and sank the Titanic. So who could possibly believe some of these lies that Chris comes up with? The people who are choosing to focus on the tip of the iceberg, because it's much easier to go around the 10% tip of the iceberg towards your destination and just ignore the 90% mass underneath that's going to cause all the damage and sink your ship. You might be hearing some chainsawing and wood chipping outside. Got the tallest tree in the neighborhood's getting chopped down, and how appropriate that we're going into the insecure, immature child in a man's body who can't handle being number 2 in a relationship, when the tallest tree in the neighborhood, the number 1 tree, is the most risk of causing the biggest amount of damage, so it has to be chopped down. The number 1 tree is the number 1 target. How appropriate. So, getting back to the 90% of unseen mass that sinks the Titanic, here's another line that you could focus on the tip of the iceberg and ignore the true meaning. When Chris is talking about the affair and how it progressed, he starts saying things like, "I didn't think it would ever get to that level. I didn't think anything would happen." And if you just choose, like, when I first listened to this without knowing any of the details of the case, the tip of the iceberg I was looking at was relating it to my own life. Like, something could just happen that, oh my God, I can't believe it got to this for me. And really, if you relate it to all the details of the case, what he's leaving out is, I didn't think I would succeed at it. A decent person would look at that statement, "I didn't think it would happen, I didn't think it could happen to me," and say, "Oh, he must mean I didn't think I would do it. I didn't think I would go through with it. I didn't think I would go down that road." But when we compare it to everything else, the 90% unseen mass underwater, what he's really saying is, I didn't think I would succeed at it. I can't believe I actually made it that work. I actually had an affair, just like the people in the movies. And then he has to add, and that didn't sit right with me, when really we've seen many examples of him being gleeful and giddy at the fact that he had an affair on his pregnant wife. So even as I was relating to this and kind of doing what I just said and filling in the blanks with my own meaning to give him a free pass on his true intentions, I kept hitting this wall of the affair. I couldn't get past it to really sympathize or empathize with him. And it was what it was the true meaning of didn't think it would happen, and how he kind of leaves that vague and isn't willing to specify it as a decent person would. So as we're starting to veer now into the conversation goes to the differences and the comparisons between the mistress and Shanann. And how when he first started dating Shanann, Chris wasn't her type, but he kept pursuing her. And we see how persistent Chris is in trying to win people over. 10 plus hours in the interrogation, 4 plus hours in this prison interview to win over the FBI agents who know he's a murderer. He will go to those. He could have just said in the beginning, I don't want to talk. I'm going back to my cell. You guys can figure out whatever you want to on your own. But he spends hours upon hours trying to win them over because that's his fuel. That's the most important thing, is what people think of him. So imagine if this guy who's dealing with trying to cover up a murder will spend that much time trying to win people over. Imagine how persistent and sneaky and snaky he was. Free and clear. All he had at the time he met Shanann was a full-time job probably, and the rest of his day was free. No kids, no murders to cover up. So imagine the lengths he went to win her over and to trick her into thinking that he was what she wanted. And that's what he did. He changed Shanann's mind about him, and at the most vulnerable time of her life. She was going through a divorce. So, Chris reads people and says he was looking at, Shanann was probably talking about all the stuff that didn't work in her marriage, and Chris was just taking all that in and saying, oh, well, all they have to do is avoid those things and I'll be the better man. Again, he wants to be the number one tree. So he was willing to do, and he goes into all these stories. We've heard it again and again, what he went through to win her over, going to her doctor's appointments, her pill box, letting her lay on his lap for hours while he had to pee, all the chores he did, taking care of the kids. He won't stop talking about what a great guy he is and how much he went through and what he did for her, for Shanann, to win her over. And was willing to do whatever it took to change her mind. So why would he go through such efforts? How did he really feel about her? Well, he says that in the prison interview next. I did all that, yada, 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 because, I liked her. That's it. Because, I liked her. All that time, all that effort, changing her mind about him, inserting himself in her life because, he liked her. Pretty resentful. And what I gather from that is that he didn't really want Shanann, whether he knows it or not. This is what we can see about him. He didn't really want Shanann. He wanted what she represented. For one, for him to satisfy his physical needs is what we all want at a certain time in our life. That's normal. But more importantly, for him to look good by association, and exactly what we see now, what we saw leading up to the crime he committed, and now people refusing to believe he was guilty of it now, or at least that he acted alone. No one saw that coming, and which means he got exactly what he wanted out of the relationship with Shanann, is for everyone to think that he's a good guy up until the crime, and then most people turn on him. But still, it worked up to the point where it allowed him to get away with the crime for 2.5 days. So to an extent, it did work, and he got what he wanted out of it. So why were things different with the mistress? Why was he willing to go astray and leave after all that effort to win over Shanann? despite just liking her and despite the fact that he wasn't her type and he went through all that effort to change her mind. How are things different with the mistress? And here is where Chris's logic just goes right down the toilet he will be spending the rest of his nights beside instead of a woman, and deservedly so based on this logic about women, because he lists all the things that he did with the mistress during the affair while Shanann and the kids were out of town. Oh, went to the car museum, never done that before. Went to the sand dunes, always wanted to do that. Went camping, always wanted to do that, never done that before. And he's like making these things independent from Shanann, like they couldn't have done them together with Shanann. So I can't help but wondering, this relationship was so special because you did all these new things with the mistress. What did Shanann say when you suggested those activities to her? Oh, wait, you didn't. And if you did and she turned it down at the least bit of rejection, we know what you did. Okay, no problem. Okay, yeah, I don't really want to go to the car museum. I'm too old for that. Yeah, sand dunes, that's for kids. Camping, it's cold out there. We don't have to go camping. Anything to make Shanann happy, if he even brought it up to her. So what's going on here is the way he would meekly milksop his agreement to Shanann to keep her liking him, and then now he gets to do all these things because the mistress wants to do them. He's attributing his own behavior to others, thereby admitting that he only pretends to be what others want to see, and that he's not really being himself ever. He's got no long-term values to follow, and to stay true to, no moral compass to follow. He's just doing whatever the person in front of him that he thinks will give him what he wants will like to see from him. He's being that person. And what did the mistress want to see? Well, she wanted to see, apparently, more of who he really was. Because as he says, she allowed him to be himself, which, as we know, is an adulterer and a murderer of the innocent. And the way that Chris describes this special relationship he had with the mistress that he couldn't have with Shanann for the reasons I just mentioned, it just takes his logic even further down the porcelain throne into the most superficial and immature levels that a grown person can possibly follow. I just can't believe someone would legitimately believe this. He says things like, when he's talking about the mistress, she never had anyone fix things as far as like, hey, you know, where we're at in a relationship. She never had I fixed things around the house. I was always trying to fix her things. She never had that before. And she felt like she never wanted anyone to stay in her place. But with me, it was different. She wanted me to stay in her place. Is he really stupid enough to believe that a 30-year-old woman with many male partners in her past has never had anyone try to fix things in a relationship? Never had anyone fix things around her house? Never wanted anyone to stay over out of all of her partners? Is this guy really stupid enough to believe that? Or is he, like many other examples, choosing to focus on the tip of the iceberg and ignoring the 90% of truth under the surface? Because there is no third option. Either he's stupid enough to really think that, or he's choosing to believe the lie. We've seen a lot of examples of that, where he chooses to believe his own lies and the lies of others if it suits his needs. Like the thing about his dad starting drugs because he moved out of the house at the appropriate age of 18 and then had his life together where he didn't need to move back. That was the reason his parents gave for his father using drugs, and Chris chose to believe it. Went into that in the interrogation review, so we don't need to relitigate that. But it's so important to look at the big picture, because Chris is saying things like, I didn't control the situation, I let the situation control me. And it's real tempting to just believe that and want to go along with that. And we all can feel out of control sometimes, like the world is overwhelming us and we have no control over things. However, a minute later, he contradicts himself as far as you can when Graham says, "Can we talk about the hardest thing?" And Chris's first statements about the night he committed the crime show that he had total control over the situation. Because when he's describing the night when Shanann got home, he says, "I felt her getting to bed." And then really fast, he goes through this. I checked my phone at 2 a.m. Okay, she's in there. Now let's unpack that. I felt her get into bed. Well, I didn't really feel her get into bed. I checked my phone 2 a.m. Okay, she's in there. And then the mistress separately corroborates this story. They've never gotten together on this, and yet they independently from each other corroborate the same story, that Chris was waiting up for her. The mistress said in an interview that it seemed like when she was talking to him that night before Shanann got home, that Chris was waiting up for Shanann to get home. So then at 2 a.m., he checks his phone to see what time it is and says, "Okay, she's in there." Like, it's go time. Now we can start the plan. And he just zips right through that part because that indicates and denotes that he was actually waiting for her to get up, and that this means he can start his plan now. Okay, she's in there. But just a minute earlier, if you just focus on the soundbite and then make your mind up about it, how much you're missing. I didn't control the situation. I let the situation control me. And then a minute later, okay, she's in bed. 2 a.m., it's go time. He hopped out of bed, jubilant, giddy, ready to start his plan. Let's go. Within a minute of each other. This guy is a puppet master pretending to be a puppet. So we'll get into more of the total mess masquerading as Chris's version of the murders in the next video, because we're getting kind of long in this one. So I'll see you in part 5.